My name is Alara Vance. Before I learned to see the world through the lens of human occupation, the sacred, mundane, and often challenging ways we fill our days, I saw it through literature. I spent my 20s lost in the architecture of novels, believing that the clearest path to understanding the human heart was through the stories we tell. But stories on a page, I discovered, were a poor substitute for the messy, tangible reality of helping someone relearn how to hold a spoon or navigate a crowded room. And so, I traded metaphors for weighted blankets and character arcs for treatment plans, eventually finding my way to Bridgewater, Oregon, a city that felt like it was perpetually steeping in a gentle, gray tea. I'd moved for a position at the Willow Creek Pediatric Center, a place that, on its surface, was as hopeful as its name. Its walls were painted in soft greens and blues, and the air hummed with the quiet, determined energy of children working to conquer their own small worlds. For 2 weeks, I breathed in this curated peace, feeling I had finally found a professional home. The work was demanding, but the environment felt collaborative, a gentle ecosystem of support. That ecosystem shattered on the Monday Lena returned. She had been on a 3-month unpaid leave, a fact I'd absorbed with little interest. But her reappearance was an event. I was in the main therapy gym, helping a little boy with dyspraxia stack foam blocks, when the front door chimed. A collective breath was held. Conversations didn't so much stop as they froze, suspended in midair. Even the children, attuned to the subtle shifts in atmospheric pressure that adults so often miss, seemed to pause. Lena stood in the doorway, a slim figure silhouetted against the morning drizzle. She clutched the strap of her bag, her expression a careful, unreadable blink. "Look what the rain washed in," Beth, our lead physical therapist, murmured, her voice carrying across the suddenly cavernous room. Guess she got tired of her little vacation. The venom in her tone was so sharp it felt physical. I looked from Beth's smug face to Lena's pale one. I was an outsider, a new gear in a machine whose intricate and apparently rusted workings I was only just beginning to understand. The chill followed us into the morning staff meeting. Margaret, our director, a woman whose professionalism was a kind of armor, delivered a monologue on the themes of dedication and professional commitment. She spoke of the sacrifices we all make for the children and the importance of a stable, reliable team. Her gaze, sharp as a raptor's, remained fixed on Lena for the entire 10-minute speech. Lena sat with her hands folded on the table, her posture perfectly still, absorbing the verbal blows without flinching. It was a masterclass in endurance, and it was terrifying to watch. The full story, or at least the official version of it, came at lunchtime. Beth cornered me by the bank of microwaves, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A word of advice, Alara. Stay away from Lena." I waited, placing my container of leftover pasta into the microwave. "She abandoned her family," Beth continued, leaning closer as if sharing a state secret. "Walked out on her husband and their 16-year-old son, Leo, 3 months ago. Just gone. No note, no warning." She paused for effect, her eyes wide with performative disgust. "And Leo is autistic. High-functioning, sure, but still. What kind of mother does that to her child?" I thought of my last job, a place I'd left after a series of false rumors had painted me as unprofessional and emotionally volatile. I remembered the burning loneliness of being misunderstood, the desperate wish for just one person to set aside the gossip and simply listen. I looked over at Lena, who was eating a small apple at an empty table in the corner, and I decided to be the person I had once needed. Over the next few weeks, I watched Lena's professional life become a quiet, sustained torture. Other therapists would forget to include her in case consultations for shared patients. Parents, after hushed conversations with Beth in the waiting room, would suddenly request a different occupational therapist. Margaret assigned her a caseload that seemed designed to break a person, the children with the most severe behavioral challenges, the ones who bit and scratched, the ones whose rage left you with blooming purple bruises on your arms. The break room would empty out the moment she entered. Her lunch, a simple sandwich and a piece of fruit, began to vanish from the staff fridge with such regularity that she eventually stopped bringing one at all. But here is what made no sense. Lena was a miracle worker. She was assigned a nonverbal 7-year-old boy who had already bitten 3 other therapists, sending one to urgent care. With Lena, he was a different child. I watched them from across the gym, mesmerized. She never raised her voice. She never showed a flicker of frustration. When he began to melt down, she wouldn't restrain him. She would get down on his level, applying deep pressure to his joints with her steady hands, her voice a low, soothing hum. "You are safe," she'd whisper, her words a lifeline in his storm. "I have you. Breathe with me, buddy." In and out. When the clinic's supply of sensory tools ran low, she brought her own from home, a worn weighted vest, a box of fidgets, a soft, fraying blanket. She stayed late, long after the rest of us had gone, writing meticulous, personalized home plans for parents who would barely meet her eyes. No one ever thanked her. They took the fruits of her labor, her expertise, her bottomless well of patience, and then turned their backs, resuming the pretense that she was invisible. She was a ghost who still managed to heal the living. Everything changed on a rain-soaked Tuesday afternoon during a session with Noah Harrison. Noah was 8, with a severe ADHD diagnosis that left him in a perpetual state of motion, a small, human hurricane. His father, a large man who always smelled faintly of stale whiskey and resentment, seemed to view the therapy as a personal insult. That day, Noah was having a particularly rough time. He was ricocheting off the padded walls of the sensory room, screaming, throwing weighted balls with surprising force. I was trying to guide him through a calming sequence when a heavy ball caught me squarely in the stomach, knocking the wind out of me. As I doubled over, gasping for air, the door flew open. Mr. Harrison loomed there, his face flushed with anger. "This is garbage," he roared, his voice echoing in the small space. "This baby therapy is making him worse." He strode forward and yanked Noah up by the arm. The boy's scream sharpened into a cry of pain. "Mr. Harrison, please," I managed to say, pushing myself upright. "We need to be gentle." He whipped around, his bulk forcing me back against the wall. His hand slammed into the padding inches from my head. "You people are a scam," he hissed, spit flying from his lips. "You make them worse, so we keep paying you." His other hand shot out, grabbing my shoulder, his fingers digging into the muscle like talons. "Maybe you're the one who needs a lesson." I froze. A cold, paralyzing fear washed over me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. It was as if my entire being had short-circuited. And then, Lena was there. She seemed to materialize from the very air, stepping between us without a hint of hesitation. "Let her go," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it had a core of steel I had never heard before. "Now," he sneered, his grip on my shoulder tightening. "Don't you tell me what to do. I've heard all about you. Walking out on your own disabled kid." He raised his free hand as if to strike her, but Lena didn't even flinch. She simply held his gaze and spoke in that same impossibly calm, neutral tone. "You are hurting your son. Step back, or I will call Child Protective Services." It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. Something in her unwavering stillness, in the utter certainty of her voice, broke through his drunken rage. He released Noah, who scrambled immediately to Lena, clinging to her leg like she was the only solid thing in the world. He released me, too, stumbling back a step. Lena knelt, her body protectively shielding Noah from his father as she gently checked the boy's arm for marks. Mr. Harrison, his bravado deflating, stormed out of the room, shouting about lawsuits and crazy, broken women. The moment he was gone, Lena turned to me, her face softening with concern. "Alara? Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" She gently touched my shoulder where his fingers had been. "You saved me," I whispered, the words trembling as the adrenaline began to recede, leaving me shaky and cold. She squeezed my hand, her own cool and steady. "We look out for each other," she said. Then she added, almost to herself, a quiet, mournful amendment. "Or we're supposed to." Margaret summoned us to her office immediately. I expected, at the very least, a word of thanks, perhaps an acknowledgement of the danger we had just faced. Instead, she turned her fury on Lena. "You escalated that situation unnecessarily, Lena," Margaret began, her voice dangerously low. "Mr. Harrison has already called. He says you threatened him, that you deliberately turned his son against him." "He was assaulting Alara," Lena said, her voice still level. "Was he?" Margaret countered, her eyebrow arched. "Or is it possible that your own personal situation is clouding your judgment? Someone who abandons their own family might be prone to misinterpreting normal parental frustration as abuse." "Margaret, I was there. I saw everything," I interrupted, my own voice shaking with disbelief. Lena de-escalated the situation. "She protected a child, and she protected me." "Did she?" Margaret's eyes were like chips of ice. "Or did she terrorize a father in front of his son? Perhaps she's projecting. After all, her own son is likely terrified of her abandonment." She placed Lena on formal probation. "One more incident," she said, sliding a write-up across the desk. "One more complaint from a parent, and you're finished here." Lena's hands trembled as she signed the document. I watched her bite her lip, a small, sharp movement, hard enough that I thought I saw a pinprick of blood. The following week, the quiet campaign of harassment exploded into open warfare. Someone took a photo of Lena's beat-up sedan in the clinic parking lot late one night and posted it to the unofficial staff group chat. The caption read, "Guess who's living in her car? No wonder she left her family. Can't even take care of herself." The replies were a cascade of cruelty. "Probably blew all their savings on whatever midlife crisis this is. That poor husband. And that poor boy. Maybe if she apologized, he'd take her back." By noon, printed copies of the photo and comments had been anonymously taped up around the clinic, on the break room fridge, the supply closet door, and, most cruelly, on Lena's own locker, with the words "Go home" scrawled across the top in thick, black marker. I watched her pull them down, one by one, her movements methodical, her face a mask. Beth and a few other therapists stood by the water cooler, laughing openly. "Truth hurts, doesn't it?" one of them called out. That evening, long after everyone else had left, I found her. She was in one of the small sensory rooms, sitting on the floor amidst a pile of weighted blankets, her face buried in her hands. Her shoulders shook with silent, racking sobs. The carefully constructed dam of her composure had finally broken. I didn't say anything. I just sat down on the floor beside her. After a moment, she sagged against my shoulder, the fight finally gone out of her. "I'm so tired, Alara," she whispered, her voice thick with exhaustion. "I'm so tired of being strong." We sat in the dim, soft light, the only sound her ragged breathing. "You're the only one here who even sees me as a person," she said after a long silence. "Everyone else, they look at me and they see a monster. A mother who would leave her child." Her breath hitched. "But I had to leave. I had to." "What really happened, Lena?" I asked gently, my voice barely above a whisper. She took a shaky breath and slowly, deliberately, rolled up the sleeve of her left arm. In the dim light, I saw them, a constellation of old scars, round and puckered, mottling the pale skin of her forearm. "Cigarette burns. My husband. David. He started small," she said, her voice hollow. "A criticism here, a little isolation there. Cutting me off from my friends, my family. Then it became more." She gestured to the scars. "He'd say it was for my own good. To teach me." She let the sleeve fall. "But Leo, that's what kills me. That's the part one can't." Tears streamed down her face now, unchecked. "David trained him. He convinced Leo that every time he had a meltdown, it was because I was a bad mother. He taught him that his autism was a weapon he could use to get what he wanted. Leo doesn't understand adult boundaries, not in the same way. He just knows his dad's rules." My stomach turned to ice. "The night I left," she said, her voice dropping to a near-inaudible whisper, "they cornered me in the kitchen. David and Leo. David was angry about something. I don't even remember what. He held me down while his dad." She couldn't finish the sentence. She just shook her head, a violent, negating motion. "When I managed to get my phone and call 911, Leo was the one who talked to the officers. He told them I was having one of my confused spells. He played up his autism, crying, telling them how hard it was when I got overwhelmed trying to care for him. A sweet, struggling autistic boy versus a hysterical, unstable mother. It wasn't a contest. They believed him. They left me there with him. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her as she shook with the weight of it all. The quiet hum of the therapy room's air filter seemed to amplify the silence, filled with the ghosts of everything she had endured alone. The soft lighting, meant to be calming for the children, now cast long, skeletal shadows across her face, making her look more fragile and exhausted than I had ever seen her. Lena eventually pulled back, her hands trembling as she wiped at her tear-streaked face. She reached for her phone, its screen cracked and spiderwebbed, then froze. The screen lit up with a text from an unknown number. Her face went ashen as she read it, her voice a faint, terrified whisper. "It's from a teller at our bank. She says David was in today, trying to get around the freeze I put on our joint accounts. He was asking about ways to declare me mentally incompetent to gain full control." Before the weight of this new threat could even settle, the door to the sensory room burst open. Margaret stood there, her arms crossed, taking in the scene, our proximity, Lena's tear-stained face, my arms still resting on her back, with a look of cold, vindictive calculation. "Mandatory staff meeting. Conference room." 5 minutes, she announced, her eyes lingering on us for a beat too long. The implication was clear. Lena scrambled to her feet, creating a sudden distance between us, but the image had been seared into Margaret's mind. She had what she wanted. The conference room felt like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided. Margaret launched into a presentation, the slides detailing new workplace policies on professional fraternization and inappropriate emotional entanglements between staff. She never looked at Lena, but her gaze was locked on me the entire time, each bullet point a thinly veiled accusation. The air grew thick with unspoken meaning. Beth, never one to miss an opportunity, added her own commentary. "It's so easy to be manipulated by someone who's desperate," she said, just loud enough for the whole table to hear, while pretending to whisper to the therapist next to her. "Especially when you're new and don't know the whole story." Several heads nodded in agreement. Every time I tried to speak, to defend the simple act of comforting a colleague, my words were twisted into proof of my naivety, my compromised judgment. After the meeting, I checked my phone. 3 missed calls from my boyfriend, Mark. A terse text, "Cancel dinner again? What's going on, Alara?" Before I could reply, Lena approached me in the hallway, her face a mask of guilt. "I have to get to the women's shelter before they close intake," she said, her voice low. "But my car, it's been making this awful clanking noise. I don't think it will make it across town." I was faced with a choice. I had a crucial planning meeting with Margaret, a mandatory part of my probationary period as a new hire. Missing it would give her the perfect, officially documented reason to formalize her concerns about my lack of commitment. But Lena stood there, unconsciously rubbing the wrist I now knew had been held down in her own kitchen, and the choice became devastatingly simple. As I helped Lena into my car, I saw Margaret watching from her office window, a small, satisfied smile on her face. She would have the email documenting my insubordination typed up before we even hit the main road. The drive across Bridgewater was a symphony of escalating crises. Lena's phone, her only link to the outside world, finally died, the damaged charging port giving out completely. Mark sent another text, this one laced with anger. "Are you seriously choosing this drama with your coworker over our relationship?" And then my work email pinged. It was from Margaret. "Ilara, we need to have an immediate discussion regarding your performance and professional priorities." At the shelter, the intake form required a permanent address. Lena hesitated, the pain of the lie twisting her features, before writing down her mother's address in a town 2 hours away. The intake worker gave her a suspicious look but processed the paperwork. As she signed the last form, Lena's breathing became rapid and shallow. She clutched her chest, her eyes wide with panic. "Leo," she gasped, hyperventilating. "His therapy day is Thursday. David will have to bring him. What if this makes everything worse for him?" The intake worker, a kind woman with weary eyes, called for a counselor while I tried to talk Lena down, using the same grounding techniques she used with the children at Willow Creek. Breathe with me, Lena. In and out. You're safe. The profound, bitter irony of the moment was lost on neither of us. I stumbled into my apartment after midnight. My roommate, Chloe, was on the couch, her laptop open. The glow of the screen illuminated her worried face. I glanced at her screen. The search history showed coworker helping runaway mother and Willow Creek Pediatric Center reviews. Alara, what is going on? She asked, her concern edged with judgment. People are starting to talk. Just then, my phone rang. It was Lena, calling from the shelter's landline. Thursday, she said, a fragile thread of hope in her voice. It's Leo's regular therapy day. David has to bring him. It might be the only chance I get to see him, even if it's just from across the parking lot. The hope was so raw, so desperate, it broke my heart. Chloe found me at 2 a.m, surrounded by printouts, researching Oregon's domestic violence laws, emergency custody statutes, and the legal definition of coercive control. She sat on the floor beside me, her expression grim. You're getting in too deep, Alara. This isn't your fight. You're going to destroy your own life. I tried to explain, to make her understand the look in Lena's eyes, the burn marks, the story of the 911 call, but she just kept shaking her head. The next morning, an email from Human Resources was waiting in my inbox. Margaret's formal complaint had triggered an official review of my boundary issues. They wanted to meet with me at 9 a.m. I sat across a polished table from the HR director as she pulled up my file. We had a situation a few years ago, she said, her tone cool and practiced. An employee became overly involved in a colleague's personal marital disputes. It compromised the entire team dynamic. That person was terminated. We see a concerning pattern developing here, Ms. Vance. My attempts to defend myself only dug the hole deeper. Every explanation sounded like an excuse. Every justification for my actions made me sound more emotionally compromised, more unstable. I left with a formal warning in my employee file and the cold certainty that I was being carefully managed out. Meanwhile, David's public relations campaign was flawless. A new Facebook post showed him and Leo at a community fundraiser. The caption, trying to maintain some normalcy for this brave kid. We continue to pray for his mother's safe and healthy return to us. It had over 500 likes and a flood of comments praising his strength and devotion. The narrative was set in stone. He was the heroic single father, and Lena was the mentally ill runaway. Exhaustion began to fray the edges of my own professional competence. During a session, I forgot to document a key developmental milestone a child had achieved. Beth, who had been observing from the doorway, reported it to Margaret immediately. Another black mark in my file. Another nail in my professional coffin. That evening, Mark showed up at my apartment unannounced. Our 3-year relationship, all the shared dreams and quiet moments, came down to a stark ultimatum delivered in my living room. It's her or me, Alara, he said, his face hard. You have to stop this crusade for a woman who abandoned her own special needs child. You're throwing everything away. The words cut so deeply because a tiny, terrified part of me wondered if he was right. What if I had gotten it all wrong? The war was no longer cold. It was ablaze, and it was consuming every part of my life. I met Lena in the Walmart parking lot after dark to give her a burner phone I'd bought with cash. She looked hollowed out, her resilience worn down to a nub. He knows I'm fighting back now, she whispered, her eyes scanning the dark lot. This won't end until one of us is completely destroyed. As she spoke, I saw movement near the store's entrance. David. He stepped out from behind a parked truck, his phone raised, the small red light of the recording indicator glowing in the darkness. He walked towards us, his expression a mask of triumphant sorrow. He was filming us. Evidence. The unstable runaway mother meeting her accomplice in secret. We scrambled into my car and sped away, but the damage was done. He had his narrative, and now he had the footage to prove it. The blaze was getting hotter. The next blow landed in the one place I thought was my own. My Thursday evening yoga class. I unrolled my mat, seeking an hour of peace, only to see David walk in and place his mat directly behind mine. During the opening circle, when the instructor invited us to share an intention, he spoke. His voice was thick with manufactured grief as he told the class of strangers that he was there to find the strength to keep hoping for his wife, who was struggling with her mental health and had left their family. Sympathetic murmurs filled the room. A woman next to him placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. I felt dozens of pairs of eyes on me, filled with pity for him and judgment for the anonymous, cruel wife he described. Shaking, I gathered my things and fled mid-class. The ground was crumbling beneath my feet. I spent hours online, sifting through David's public life. He was a youth baseball coach. I found the community center's website and scrolled through years of team photos. A disturbing pattern emerged. In every single picture, Leo stood slightly apart from the other children, an invisible barrier around him. No other adult volunteer ever stood close to him. In action shots from games, he was often on the periphery, his father watching from the dugout. It was a subtle, chilling portrait of orchestrated isolation. My own therapist, a gentle woman named Dr. Anya Sharma, voiced her professional concern. "Ilara," she said softly, "you need to create distance. Your sleep is suffering, you've lost weight, your own emotional reserves are depleted. You cannot save Lena by setting yourself on fire." I nodded, I agreed with her logic, but in my heart I knew, abandoning Lena now would be like abandoning a part of myself. The final ultimatum came not from David, but through Lena's older sister, who called her at the shelter. David, she said, had offered a deal. He would allow Lena a supervised, 1-hour visit with Leo. All she had to do was sign a legally prepared document admitting she was mentally unstable, had abandoned her family due to a psychiatric crisis, and voluntarily relinquished her custody rights in his favor. Lena showed me the draft he'd emailed. Signing it meant seeing her son, but it also meant legal and social suicide. It meant her life, as she knew it, would be over. Refusing meant the agonizing separation from Leo would continue, perhaps indefinitely. She refused. Within an hour, a new post appeared on the Bridgewater Community Facebook page, shared by David's sister. Mother refuses professional help, chooses pride over seeing son she abandoned. The comments were a firestorm of outrage, demanding CPS intervene to protect Leo from such a toxic, selfish woman. It was in that moment, reading those vitriolic comments, that something in me shifted. The gentle, empathetic woman who had entered Willow Creek was gone, burned away by the injustice. What was left was something harder, sharper. Chloe was right. This wasn't my fight. It was our fight. And if David wanted a war of public perception and documented evidence, then that is what we would give him. We began our counteroffensive in the quiet of the public library, a sanctuary of information. We realized that for the past year, Lena had been unconsciously documenting her abuse in the most brilliantly hidden place, her patient notes. Using clinical terminology, she described her own state. Phrases I'd initially read as descriptions of her young patients, I now saw in a horrifying new light. Client presents with significant guarding behavior. Heightened startle response to loud male voices. Defensive positioning when approached unexpectedly. It was all there, a diary of terror written in a language only another therapist would understand. What Margaret and HR had labeled as proof of Lena's instability was, in fact, her desperate, coded cry for help. The pieces started to fall into place. Lena's own mother, who had been cowed into silence by David's threats to cut off access to her grandson, had a change of heart. During a tense, prearranged encounter in a pharmacy aisle, she slipped Lena a folder. It contained Leo's most recent school reports and medical records. The data was stark. In the 3 months since Lena had left, Leo's social skills had regressed. He developed a stutter, and his doctor had prescribed medication for anxiety-induced insomnia. The boy was not thriving under his father's heroic care. He was deteriorating. The next step required a betrayal. I started strategically befriending Beth, the lead gossip. I bought her coffee, commiserated about difficult cases, and slowly, carefully, validated her view of Lena. One evening, after a particularly draining week, I invited her out for drinks. After 2 glasses of wine, her guard dropped. "Between you and me," she slurred, "I knew something was off with Lena months ago. She came to work with a bruise on her cheek once. said she walked into a door. But the look in her eyes, I held my breath, my phone on the table between us, its recording app active. David can be intense. But hey, it's not my business. I saved the audio file, my stomach churning with the sour taste of my own duplicity. I had cultivated a friendship for the sole purpose of extracting a confession. The old Alara would have been horrified. The new Alara simply labeled the file beth_admission.mp3 and moved on. The final piece of the puzzle was the most public and the most painful. I wrote my own story. I detailed the workplace bullying I'd experienced at my previous job, the gaslighting, the feeling of being isolated and disbelieved. I didn't name names or places, but I described the psychological toll. Then, I connected it to what I had witnessed at Willow Creek. I posted it on my LinkedIn profile, in OT forums, and in the Bridgewater community Facebook group. I used my own trauma as a shield for Lena, a way to publicly state, I know what this looks like, because something like it happened to me. And you are all getting the story wrong. It was a profound act of self-betrayal, laying my own scars bare for public consumption, but it was the only move we had left. The day of the custody hearing, the courtroom was a tableau of our shared nightmare. Margaret was there in a crisp power suit, ready to testify to Lena's instability. Beth sat behind her, refusing to meet my eyes. Several other therapists from the clinic were present, subpoenaed to support David's narrative. David himself sat beside his lawyer, the picture of a grieving, concerned father. But things began to unravel quickly. Lena's lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman funded by a domestic violence legal aid group, presented her evidence methodically. The recording of David's threatening voicemail to Lena's mother. Leo's medical records, showing his clear decline. The sworn affidavit from Leo's teacher, which included a creative writing assignment where he wrote about a boy who had to follow Dad's rules at home, which were secret and different from outside rules. When Beth was called to the stand, the audio file of her drunken confession was played. The courtroom was silent as her own voice filled the space, admitting she'd suspected abuse. Her face turned blotchy and red. Under cross-examination, the other therapists admitted they had never personally witnessed any unstable behavior from Lena. Their opinions were based entirely on gossip from Beth and Margaret. The security guard from the clinic, faced with a subpoena and the threat of perjury, recanted his earlier statement. He described Mr. Harrison's assault on me and Lena's calm, protective intervention. He detailed Margaret's subsequent retaliation. When Margaret took the stand, her polished composure cracked. The timeline of her write-ups and complaints didn't align with the dates of the actual events. Her claims that Lena had recruited me were disproven by my hiring date. She was a supervisor whose personal vendetta had been exposed under oath. Finally, David testified. When questioned about the coded therapy notes, the burn marks, the 911 call, his facade of the gentle, concerned husband crumbled. He launched into a furious tirade, his voice echoing through the chamber, about how Lena had betrayed their family, how she had destroyed their perfect life by refusing to submit to his guidance, how she had turned his own son against him. In that moment, everyone in the courtroom saw the man Lena had been describing all along. Not a pillar of the community, but a tyrant whose kingdom was a house of fear. The judge's ruling was swift. Temporary sole custody of Leo was awarded to Lena. A restraining order was issued against David. A formal investigation into the workplace practices at Willow Creek was ordered. There was no cinematic, triumphant exit from the courtroom. Lena simply sagged in her chair, a quiet, shuddering sob of relief shaking her entire body. I walked over and placed my hand on her shoulder. We had won. But looking at her exhausted face, at the wreckage of our lives, my lost career, her shattered family, our depleted savings and broken relationships, it felt less like a victory and more like the end of a war, where the survivors stand dazed on a battlefield, too tired to celebrate, able only to take the first, shaky step toward whatever comes next. A year has passed. The new normal has settled in like a low tide. Lena has primary custody, and David has bi-weekly supervised visits. He still runs his father's rights group, painting himself as the victim of a biased system. The Bridgewater community remains divided. I never went back to pediatric therapy. The termination, the formal warnings, the testimony, it had all made me unemployable in that world. Instead, I took a job as an advocate at the same shelter that had taken Lena in. I use my experience to help other women navigate the labyrinth of restraining orders and custody battles. The pay is a fraction of what I used to make, but the work fills a space in me I didn't know was empty. My relationship with Mark is a distant memory, and some of the friendships I lost never returned. That is a scar I carry. Lena is slowly rebuilding. She works part-time at a small, private practice on the other side of town. She and Leo are in therapy, both together and separately, learning a new language for their relationship, one that isn't based on fear and control. His healing is a slow, winding path. Some days are good, some days, the ghosts of Dad's rules are still too loud in his head. Sometimes, Lena and I meet for coffee. We don't talk much about the past. We talk about difficult cases at our respective jobs, about a funny thing Leo said, about the persistent Oregon rain. We are two women bound not by a shared triumph, but by a shared trauma. We survived. We bear the scars, the financial ruin, the social fallout. But in the quiet moments, watching the steam rise from my cup, I look at her, at the gentle strength in her eyes, the resilience that refused to be extinguished, and I understand. I didn't just save her, and she didn't just save me. We held a light for each other in the suffocating darkness until we could both find our way out. And that, I've come to believe, is a story more profound than any I ever read in a book.